Hello and welcome back to Breakfast Ratings Presents Masterclass with Market Experts. This expert session is basically aimed at understanding the fundamentals of economic and financial topics. As you all are aware, given the pandemic scenario currently, the country is facing a lot of disruption in business activities, and it is expected that government will announce various stimulus measures to revive the economy. However, the current situation is such that even the financial conditions of both central and state governments are also in a bad shape because of shortage of revenue collections. So for the government, also it is a challenging time to manage its fiscal balance. Considering the scenario, we have planned for an expert session on the topic macroeconomics of fiscal policy to understand the fiscal policies of the government. So we have with us an eminent economist, Dr. M. Govindarao, who is also a chief economic advisor to Brickwork Ratings. If I have to give a brief description about Dr. Rao's professional expertise, being an expert in public finance with an outstanding record as a policymaker, he has done some extensive research on various aspects of public finance and development. He has also authored several books, articles on public policies. Dr. Rao has been a part of many expert committees in the past. To name a few, I could say he was a member of the 14th Finance Commission and also been a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister of India. So it is time to gain some knowledge on fiscal policies of the government, and I would like to invite Dr. Rao to begin the session. Welcome to this masterclass, sir.
Thank you, Anita, for that generous introduction. Without further ado, let me start talking about the macroeconomics of fiscal policy. You flip the next slide. So what I intend to do is during the course of next 30-40 minutes, I'll talk about, after a brief introduction, I will talk about the concept of deficit, and then of course interdependence of fiscal imbalance, savings and investment imbalance, and external imbalance. Then I'll talk about the deficits and debt, what are the major conceptual issues. Then also ask a question why we should worry about deficits. Now, generally speaking, we all public policy economists basically say whenever there is a market failure, there is government should intervene. But what happens when the governments fail? So particularly with regard to maintaining the fiscal deficit, there's always a problem. What do we do when the governments fail? And that is the reason why there is a legislative control over the deficits that have been recommended. So some sort of a rule-based fiscal policy is recommended, and that is how the fiscal responsibility and budget management comes into picture. I will also briefly talk about the Indian experience with FRBM, and then the report of the Fiscal Review Committee, which actually examined the FRBM experience in the country and made recommendations on how we should go about. There are, of course, questions of credibility because, well, the governments have been saying that they have been trying to do. There have been a lot of slippages, postponement of fiscal targets, redefining the fiscal targets, changing the goalposts and the like. So there are issues of credibility that comes into question, whereas the markets basically look at what the real situation is and not just go by what the government says. So therefore, it is important to improve the credibility of the system. And that is the reason why many countries have the fiscal council. I will also talk about the present state of fiscal, in this prevailing COVID-19 state. How do we really deal with the fiscal policy? What are the type of stimuluses that we need to do? How do we really cap the fiscal deficit at least once the coronavirus problem is over? I mean, these are some of the things that I will talk about. Next. So let me by saying that there are a number of approaches at the analytical level. People have talked about a number of approaches. There are classical approaches, there's a Keynesian approach and a new classical approaches. And, basically, the classicals believed that borrowing is a bad idea. The government should not borrow, just as the household should not borrow. And they believed that internal public debt, when you borrow, will put a burden on the future generation, because debt today is taxes tomorrow. However, when Lord Keynes came in, his followers of the Keynes always said that there is no such thing as the shifting the burden on the future generation, because it's merely a transfer that takes place. When people borrow today, basically what happens is that when the people borrow today, this is basically an investment they do. So obviously there is no burden. They willingly purchase the government bonds, and obviously they earn the rate of interest on the government bonds they earn. But at the end of the year, at the time when it matures, then again there is no burden, because the bondholders will get the money back, and then taxpayers will pay the money to them, and there is only a transfer of money from from the taxpayers to the bondholders, and there is no burden for the economy as a whole. Well, this was contested by a very eminent economist called James Buchanan, who came up with the proposition that there is something called an opportunity cost. If the economy, you see, when borrowing is done, if the borrowing is used for productive purposes to generate rate of return, it will pay for itself. If it is not used for generating productive rate of return, then obviously somebody has to bear the burden. So in other words, when the government borrows, it takes away the existing household savings, and that money, instead of that, if the private sector has borrowed, then obviously private sector generates wealth and generates incomes. From that you could pay. And therefore, public debt does involve a burden on the future generation, because at the end of the day, the people who pay for repay the borrowings done in the earlier period were not asked whether they would like to have the borrowing done at that time at all, and therefore they are victims of the policy that was done in the earlier case. So there is definitely a burden on the future generation. So there has been. So at the end of the day, what it matters is, if the government borrowing is used for productive purposes to generate rates of return, there is no future burden that will come into picture, and the loan will pay for itself. Otherwise, there is a problem. Governments all over the world have a problem. The problem is that it is easy for the governments to spend more money, but very difficult for them to actually withdraw spending. Even generally speaking, what happens is that when the economy is booming, the government expenditure should be reduced, so that private sector can continue, so that the aggregate demand is maintained at a particular level. Economy does not heat up, and it does not generate inflationary tendencies. But then at that time, generally speaking, governments don't withdraw. But at the time when the economy is in a recession, obviously it is important for the government to come and to do the spending, so that aggregate demand is maintained to maintain the full employment level. But then at that time, when the economy is shrinking, most of the governments do not find the necessary revenues to spend. So what you really have is a pro-cyclicality in spending, which is contrary to what it should be. So then, as I mentioned, when the markets fail, in fact, Martin Feldstein, one of the very eminent economists or fiscal economists, has said the government, fiscal deficit is like, it's like obesity. When you have obesity because you are overweight, you don't want to reduce the overweight because you want to continue eating. And obviously, it becomes extremely difficult for you to reduce your intake. And then the problem will feed for itself. Then you become a victim of all sorts of problems of higher heart ailment, blood pressure, sugar, and what have you. So in the similar case, fiscal deficit can be a source of all sorts of problems. We will come in a second what sort of problems they are. And therefore, we need to really rein in the fiscal deficit. And obviously, government finds it difficult to rein in the fiscal deficit, and therefore, in most of the countries, what they have said that you need to have the rule-based fiscal policy, which means that you need to have a legislative control over the government or over the executive in undertaking debt. So obviously, when the governments do not, when the market fails, the government should intervene. When the market governments fail, obviously you need to have the institutions and systems for doing checks and balances. Next, let me very briefly talk about three major concepts of deficit. One is the revenue deficit, which is basically nothing but the difference between revenue receipts and revenue expenditure. You know, the best finance minister is the housewife, because she knows what the income of the family is, and accordingly, you know, undertakes her spending program so that she doesn't really have to borrow for doing the housekeeping expenses. But the governments are not that clever. So what happens is, even for housekeeping expenses, often they borrow. So housekeeping expenses like paying wages and salaries, goods and services, transfer payments, interest payments, subsidies. I mean, these are the things. And obviously, if the revenue receipts are not adequate to pay for that, then you are actually borrowing to, you know, sort of borrowing money to incur unproductive expenditures, which will not generate a rate of return, and that will feed for itself. So that is the concept of revenue deficit, and the golden rule all over the world is that don't have the revenue deficit. Current budget deficit should be avoided. But then, you know, that's not what's happened in most of the countries, particularly in India. You know, you continue to have a huge revenue deficit at the central level. Then you have what is called the fiscal deficit, and that fiscal deficit is revenue receipts plus non-debt capital receipt, that means disinvestment money, minus the total expenditure, revenue plus capital expenditure. Now, there is a bit of a controversy on whether the non-debt capital receipt should be included at all, because the IMF definition of a fiscal deficit does not include the disinvestment money, and that is because when you disinvest, you are actually liquidating some part of your assets. So actually it is, so in that sense, if you really have a complete balance sheet analysis, obviously your assets go down. But nevertheless, you know, for the Indian case, you know, this has come to be accepted. That means that both revenue receipt, that means tax plus non-tax receipts, plus the disinvestment proceeds, minus the total revenue and capital expenditure, is the fiscal deficit. By and large, the fiscal deficit is the amount of money that you are required to borrow in a year, except that there will be some amount of adjustment in the various funds. You know, governments have lots of pockets, and these are called various funds: reserve fund, contingency fund, public account, you know, whole lot of funds they have. And from there, sometimes they are required to recoup the fund, but then in a particular year, they may draw money from some of these funds. And as a result, so the fiscal deficit does not exactly match the volume of borrowing, but then it approximates the volume of borrowing. And then there is the concept of primary deficit. Primary deficit is nothing but the fiscal deficit minus the interest payments. Now, why is it important? It's important because it basically tells you what is the deficit incurred, you know, during the course of the year, excluding the legacies of the past. Interest payment is a legacy of the past. It's because of the past sins that you have accumulated loan debt, and then you pay the interest. Excluding that, what is the liability during the course of the year? That means expenditure minus the interest payments. And you know, I mean, that minus the total revenues and non-debt capital receipts. That means fiscal deficit minus the interest payments is the primary deficit. Why is it significant? There is a rule called a Domer rule. The Domer rule basically tells you that if your primary deficit is zero, and if your growth rate of the economy is faster than the effective interest rate that you pay, then the debt will decline. Debt GDP ratio will decline over a period of time. And therefore, in order to see the sustainability of debt, so you need to really look at the Domer equation, and for that you need to know what your primary deficit is. Now let me come to the relationship of fiscal deficit with the other, both the macroeconomic balance as well as the balance of payment equilibrium. It is a Keynesian identity called income, that is Y is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus imports. Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Let me repeat. Y, that means income, is equal in a country is equal to consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus exports minus the imports. But we also know that income is equal to consumption plus savings plus taxes. When I say taxes, I include both the taxes and non-tax revenue. So we also know income is equal to consumption plus savings plus taxes. So if you substitute the second one in the expression in the first expression and simplify it, you will get an expression which is M minus X, that is equal to I minus S plus G minus T. G minus T is your fiscal deficit. It's the government expenditure minus taxes and non-tax revenue. Government expenditure includes capital, revenue and capital. So G minus T is the fiscal deficit. M minus X is your balance of payment problem. This is import minus exports. And I minus S is the macroeconomic balance within the country. That means investment plus minus savings. So if the fiscal deficit goes up, either you will have a higher balance of payment problem, or you will have a higher savings investment imbalance where saving will be more than the investment. So in other words, there is a very close interrelationship between the fiscal balance, macroeconomic balance, and the balance of payment equilibrium. And therefore, one has to be extremely careful about the fiscal deficit. As I said, when it is like obesity, unless and until you correct and do sufficient exercises, obviously you are going to have trouble. Next. Now, what are the implications? No, I'm sorry. Next, why should we worry about the deficits? Now, as I mentioned, there is a very close interrelationship between fiscal deficit, macroeconomic balance, and balance of payment equilibrium. Let me elaborate a little bit. As I said, macroeconomic and balance of payment consequences we have already talked about. Now, when the fiscal deficit is high, what happens? Ultimately, how does the government borrow? Say there are three sectors in the economy: households, corporates, and the government. Now, if you look at the corporates, they have savings, they have investment, but then their saving is not enough for them to invest, so they need more investment. They need to borrow from the market to have more investment. So obviously their savings investment balance is negative. So they need to have more, they need to draw money from the market. Now, the government also, you will see that the savings, when you have fiscal deficit, savings and investment, in fact, its balance is negative. So it's only the household that have the saving investment balance. Even within the households have physical savings, households have financial savings. It is only the household's financial saving that is available in the market. The money that they put in the bank and the organized financial system. The money they put in the house, in real estate or gold, doesn't come into picture. So household sector financial saving, and obviously is the most important the thing. And so much of the borrowing for the government as well as for the corporate sector has to come from the household sector financial savings. Now, when the government takes away much of the household sector savings, obviously the supply of savings will be less, the interest rates will go up. At higher interest rates, the corporates find it difficult to borrow and then make investments. because they will make it at a very high interest rate. It becomes unprofitable for them to make investment. So at that time, what economists call at high, when the fiscal deficit is large, it crowds out. It financially crowds out private sector investment. So one has to be careful not to see, to ensure that the private sector has adequate savings available for it for making investment. The other important problem of issue is financial. As I mentioned, now you have there is a. I already talked about the intergenerational equity issue. Now, intergenerational equity, when I talked about, basically, if the higher borrowing is not accompanied by proper investment of these assets, if the borrowing is done basically not to create assets but to pay salaries or pay interest to the interest and subsidies and transfers, then obviously from the borrowing generate assets, and in the next period, when the interest has to be paid on that borrowing, or the debt has to be retired, the government has to borrow more, because there is no sufficient assets which will generate the rate of return to pay back. And this results in borrowing today becoming taxes tomorrow, and obviously the next generation will have to pay for the sins committed by this generation. And obviously the credit rating agencies always look at solvency and sustainability of debt in every country. And obviously the credit rating of different countries depends upon how sound their fiscal management has been. And soundness of the fiscal management is seen in terms of the fiscal deficit that they have. So if the governments are rated low by the credit rating agencies, then obviously the private sector will find it difficult to borrow internationally at low rates of interest. And so therefore it is important that, for all these reasons, it's important that one has to keep a vigil on the fiscal deficit. As I said, one has to keep one's health properly. Otherwise, if you are obese, then you will have a problem of high blood pressure, sugar, heart attack, and various other things. Now, in our country, in fact, if you look at it, what has happened, the 1991 crisis, for example, when we had, one of the major reasons for the crisis is said to be the high fiscal deficit in the previous 5 years. After 1985, when Rajiv Gandhi came to power, he was in a hurry. He was in a hurry to spend a lot of money on defense and infrastructure, and a huge amount of money, borrowing was done. And Bofors is one of those cases where he wanted to modernize the armaments in the system. There was a huge amount of borrowing that was done. That created quite a lot of the macroeconomic imbalance. And as the macroeconomic imbalance, when the things started piling up, and there was already a huge amount of imports that was taking place. And when Saddam Hussein decided to raid Kuwait, the oil prices doubled, and obviously oil constituted 1/3 of the imports at the time. And when the oil prices doubled, there was a huge problem of it put a tremendous problem on the exchange rate, balance of payments, and actually the reserves were sufficient to service only 3 weeks imports. And the gold had to be physically lifted from the Reserve Bank to the Bank of Switzerland, the Bank of England, and the IMF, and to get the money. And at that time, our NRIs, who really who had put a lot of money in fact took away the money, and commercial lenders from abroad who were earlier keen to roll over the credit refused to roll over. So we got into a major crisis, and thereafterwards the reforms began. So there is a very clear evidence the problem that the fiscal deficit can create from the 1991 crisis. Now, as a matter of fact, until 1991, even in the regular discourse, we never used to get a concept of fiscal deficit. We used to only talk about budget deficit, which was basically automatic monetization of the deficit until then. Then afterwards, you see, actually from 1991, we started improving the situation. But by the time we came to 2001, there was again a problem, oil crisis, as well as the payment, the salary revision. And again, you had the fiscal deficit coming to somewhere about 10% of GDP, aggregate fiscal deficit. And, obviously there was the East Asian financial crisis in 1998. But the point is that, this problem had, this problem continued. And again, you had you started, right at 2001, there was a lot of urgency that they wanted to they wanted to correct the imbalance that existed. But and obviously in 2003-4 they passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act. After 2007-2008 things went on well, but in 2008-9 budget, in fact, there were 3 decisions taken, namely the farm loan waiver, number 2, the pay commission, implementation of pay commission recommendation for the central government employees, and number 3, the expansion of National Rural Employment Guarantee from 200 districts that prevailed earlier to the entire country. The result was there was a substantial explosion in expenditures until 2008. In fact, the fiscal correction was on course. Mainly because the income tax revenues and the service tax revenues were increasing very fast, and that revenue increase made up and covered much of the deficit. But in 2008-9, and that was also an election year, and these 3 decisions actually derailed the entire process. And in July of 2008, oil prices touched $165 a barrel. And then obviously, because it's an election year, the government was not willing to increase it was not being willing to increase the price of distillates. As a result, the subsidy, started bloating up. And then obviously, there was a global financial crisis in 2008 on September 15th, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, and thereafterwards the government said it had to provide stimulus. So not only that the entire adjustment process was set aside, but in fact additional deficits accumulated during that period. So again, you see, but from 2008, the fiscal deficit of the aggregate center and the states again started bloating up. In fact, in the budget of 2008-9, they had said that they would have a fiscal deficit of 2.5%, but actually ended up, when oil subsidies are taken into account, they ended up with 7.5% at the central level alone, and obviously, and then you had about 3% coming from the states. So altogether, almost 11% of GDP fiscal deficit from 2008 onwards. Thereafterwards, we have been trying to curtail, but what we have seen is postponement of the targets, hiding the the budget deficit in some other ways, and such other things has been continuing, and off-budget borrowings. If you see today that even in today, the fiscal deficit is shown is substantially lower than the actual fiscal deficit, because Food Corporation of India has been asked to borrow money from the National Small Saving Fund, and the outstanding balance is somewhere about 3.6 lakh crores. And that actually is the liability on the government, because the government has to repay the loan eventually, but they have been postponing this. And similarly, the fertilizer companies have not been paid their subsidies, and so you have off-budget liabilities much more. And even many of the small and medium industries were not paid their dues in order to show lower fiscal deficit. So, so you have this. So in 2001, when we had the serious crisis, they had the E.A. Sharma committee, was the Secretary Economic Affairs at the time, basically making a recommendation that the government should, in 2002, government should cap the fiscal, the central government should cap the fiscal deficit at 3%, and then this should be done over, sort of in a phased manner. And then, of course, they referred the matter to the 12th Finance Commission, and 12th Finance Commission came out with a recommendation that the aggregate fiscal deficit should not exceed 6%. Why is this 6%? That's because at that time, the available household sector financial saving was about 10% of GDP, and the current account deficit, that means money that is coming from abroad for them at that time, for investment, was at somewhere about 1.5% of GDP. So the logic of the 12th Finance Commission was that if 1.5% of GDP is given to the public sector enterprises to borrow, and if you want to leave 4% of 4% of GDP borrowing space to the corporate sector, you will be left with 6%, and 3% for the center and 3% for the states. And of course, the 13th Finance Commission reiterated the same recommendation. Basically, it said that the states sort of fiscal deficit should be somewhere about 2.4% of GDP, because GSDP was calculated at factor cost at the time, and therefore 3% of GSDP would be equal to 2.4% of GDP. So they said 5.4%, and then the 13th and the 14th Finance Commission too reiterated the same recommendation. And subsequently, there was a FRBM review committee which found that actually the household sector financial saving has substantially declined. And in fact, today, for example, if you see, household sector financial saving is just about 7.5%. And obviously, even if you say that about 2% comes from abroad, then you are left with only about 9.5%, out of which if the government itself takes away 7 to 8%, then very little, both center and the state, there is hardly anything left for the private sector to borrow. And therefore you come up with problems of liquidity from time to time, and therefore government has to come out with open market operations to keep the bond yield low. And that is how the financial repression takes place, because in order for the government to borrow money from the market at lower rate of interest, the Reserve Bank of India comes out with the open market operations from time to time. When you do the open market operations, basically you are generating new money supply. The Reserve Bank of India is purchasing government securities and issuing money supply, and in the process, so it's basically supplements the household sector financial saving by giving additional money supply, even though formally, so there is an agreement in 1997 that there should not be any automatic monetization of the deficit. There is a backward monetization that has been taking place. Next. So how do you really manage large deficits, and what are the implications? If you borrow more from the market, obviously the interest rates will go up. So you have huge, you will create what is called the financially crowding out, or you will create an inflation tax. Because when you borrow more, if you do through monetization of the deficit, then obviously what happens is that, given the volume of goods and services, and when you increase the money supply, the inflation, it will have an implications for inflation. The other way that you can do is disinvestments, but then disinvestment can be, obviously it will reduce this thing, but there are several areas where the government must disinvest, in order to sort of ensure that its focus is on governance rather than running public enterprises. So that's one of the ways you can really meet the large fiscal deficits. But obviously the governments have been very, not very active in doing this, because companies like Air India or BSNL and MTNL should be disinvested quickly so that at least the taxpayers' money doesn't go to feed them. Then the third way of financing deficit is monetizing the deficit. Earlier, as I said, before 1997, there was an automatic monetization of government deficit. Government used to issue 175 days treasury bills, and obviously these treasury bills, and then of course through the treasury bills it would take money from the Reserve Bank of India, and on expiry of the time, the treasury bills were automatically converted into medium term loans. Now this automatic monetization, which means that there was no limit for the government to go about doing things, and that led to huge amount of inflation. And in 1990, in fact, after two agreements between the then governor of Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Rangarajan, and the then Secretary Department of Economic Affairs, Monte Carlo Valia, in fact, they said that in future we will, after 1997, we will not monetize the deficit. So they stopped monetizing the deficit, but there is a roundabout route that they do it through open market operations, as I said. In all these, RBI has to play a very important role. And that is where the friction comes out often. RBI always cautions the government to keep the deficit low. In fact, Viral Acharya has been talking of the fiscal dominance and its problems on the monetary sector, and basically because the government has not been able to do this, and the government is forcing the Reserve Bank of India to do many things which it should not. And so that including transfer of the Reserve Bank's reserves to meet the fiscal deficit. Next. This is basically the way in which the fiscal deficit has moved, and you will see 1991-92, then you will see again in 2001, 2008, 2009 again peaking, again coming down, and of course it has gone up again, and this year again it will touch more than 11% of GDP. Next. These are the numbers, I don't want to repeat them, but basically you will see that the fiscal deficit numbers, were almost in 2001, 2002, it was 10.3%, and again it touched in 2008-9, it touched again 10.62%, and thereafterwards, if you take into account off-budget liabilities, in fact, even in last year itself, it comes to close to 9%. But now, with the COVID-19 crisis, there is every likelihood that the fiscal deficit this year will end up at about 12 to 13%. Next. I have given quite a bit of historical perspective. I do not want to go into the details, but as I said, the statutory, in fact, if you really look at the Constitution itself, in the Estimates Committee of the Parliament and Public Accounts Committee and the Reserve Bank of India, since 1957 have been cautioning the government that they should have statutory regulation on the public debt, and Constitution provides for that. But they never had it. So the widening deficits in 1991 crisis I talked about, and as I said, breakup of Soviet Union, Kuwait war, and increasing petroleum prices. They were the proximate causes of the fiscal deficit, touching more than 10%, and subsequent reform that was taken after borrowing from the International Monetary Fund. And again in 97-98, again you had this problem. We touched 10% in 1990, sort of 10% in 2000. Introduction of FRBM in 2000, but it was enacted on 26 August 2003. Objective is to reduce the debt to GDP ratio to 50% of the center and the states. And of course, the committee under E.S. Sharma was formed, and they said the committee recommended that three indicators, revenue deficit and fiscal deficit, as well as total liabilities, should be controlled. And obviously, they said that the progressive reduction in the fiscal deficit by 0.33 point to reach 3% by 2006. And then, of course, this was succeeded by the report of the 12th Finance Commission. And I did talk about what the 12th Finance Commission did, 13th Finance Commission did, and the 14th Finance Commission did. Next. The Fiscal Review Committee under Mr. N.K. Singh, who is the present chairman of the 15th Finance Commission, and it said that you need to review the FRBM targets. You should see whether we can have a range rather than the point estimate, and you should see whether fiscal expansion and contraction can be linked to the credit expansion and contraction. So the committee said that target variable. So promptly, the government of India said that they are not going to bother about the revenue deficit any longer. Anyway, I mean, that really means that the productivity of public spending doesn't matter any longer, according to the government. Total debt target is 60%. Can you please go back? Anyway, I mean, it's okay. I'll talk about it. Total. Yeah. Total debt target is 60%, 40% for the center, 20% for the states. Assumption, as I mentioned, household sector financial saving is 7.6%. Current deficit is 2.3%. So basically 10% is available for borrowing. So it is to be equally shared between the public and private sector. The aggregate fiscal deficit of the center and state should be 5%. And which basically means they should gradually reduce it from 3% to 2.5%. There's a question of credibility. Now, anyway, next, the credibility question comes in because I mean, the experience has shown that fiscal slippages have been common. Right from 2008-9, there have been serious slippages. There is a shifting goalpost, taking pauses, attributing the slippage to imaginary factors like creative accounting. All sorts of things are being done. And Controller and Auditor General made a report in 2018-19 where he said that fiscal situation, the FRBM situation is grim, and there is a huge amount of obfuscation that is being done by the government. In 2019-20, deferred payment is estimated at 3.5 lakh crore. Food subsidy, fertilizer subsidy, MSMEs, these are the ones which are basically deferred. And then other ways of budget financing, one public enterprise buying another public enterprise and then basically give the money to the government. It doesn't really make much sense. So of the last, if you see after last 10, 12 years, almost 8 to 9 years, the revenue forecasting has been way too above, and that creates many other problems. I would not like to get into those details, but the point is it creates a pure problem of fiscal mismanagement. And household sector savings has declined. Now aggregate household sector saving is from 17, declined to 17%, and the financial saving is 6.2%. So you have much more serious fiscal situation, sort of availability of borrowing space at the moment. Next. So one of the things that people have been saying is that since there is a credibility question, one of the ways to establish credibility is to have a fiscal council. It is an independent fiscal institution, publicly funded and staffed, and then with the professionals and not elected people, but then appointed by the legislature. They're appointed by the parliament, not by the finance ministry. It will provide greater transparency. It provides unbiased reports. It basically, in some countries, it starts with making its own projections, so that there's in fact in some of the countries, projection that is made by the fiscal council is taken as a budgetary projection. Now, independent, there are almost as many as 40 countries in the world which have these independent institutions which provide checks and balances in the system. The important tasks are independent analysis, review and monitoring and evaluation, and then of course macroeconomic and budgetary projections. And then obviously when various proposals are made by the politicians, costing those budget proposals, and advising policy makers on how exactly they should really control the deficit. Next. And so worldwide experience of this has shown that this has been a great help in many countries. There are principles like local ownership, non-partisanship, clarity of mandate, relationship with legislature, resources, so that it doesn't depend upon the government for the purpose. The IMF study has shown that stronger fiscal performance in countries with independent fiscal institutions. Belgium is legally required to adopt the macroeconomic forecast of Federal Planning Bureau, which is the Fiscal Council. In Chile, there are two institutions, one which makes forecast of trend GDP and the reference copper price, and that has improved the forecast. Similarly, in UK, Office of Budget Responsibility played an important role in achieving fiscal sustainability. So they do this, but at the same time, you should know that it is not a silver bullet, but then it can be useful in the short run. It's not a silver bullet because if there is a political willingness, there is no need for a fiscal council. If there is no political willingness, even if you have a fiscal council, you can overcome that. Just as we have been trying to overcome the FRBM legislation. But nevertheless, it brings in greater transparency. Markets will, sort of welcome, greater transparency, and then obviously markets will try to discipline the government. So the 13th Finance Commission actually made a recommendation on fiscal council, but it said then the finance ministry will appoint a commission and then reporting to it, and that doesn't really work out because it is not independent. Similarly, Fiscal Review Committee made a similar recommendation, but the 14th Finance Commission actually said the Parliament should legislate and have a fiscal council put in place. Next. Now let me come to the impact of COVID. Obviously, the impact on economic growth estimates varying from, impact minus 4.5% to minus 6.5% in GDP. And now GDP is likely to contract, and talked about contraction of almost 9%. So this will substantially impact revenues. So the contraction is 6%, loss in revenue will be something like 4.75 lakh crore at the center, or 2.5% of GDP. In addition to that, non-tax revenue, the target which is kept at 2.1 lakh crore, it's doubtful whether they can realize that. So, but then this pandemic also calls for additional expenditure by way of not only to fight the pandemic, but also to create livelihoods and sustain the living, and then of course provide stimulus. Of course, although 21 lakh crore stimulus has been announced, the fiscal component of that comes to somewhere up to 2.1 lakh crore, and there may be more that is on the annual. So the states also have been allowed to borrow additional 2% of GDP, which basically means that even without taking into account additional expenditure, you will have somewhere about 4.5% GDP extra. That will add to the fiscal deficit, and that will add to the fiscal deficit of 3.8% that has been budgeted, plus and 3.5% that has been budgeted, plus another 3% at the state level. So that means 6.5 plus another 4.5, that makes it 11. So at the end of the day, one can assume that the total fiscal deficit for the year could be somewhere about 11 to 12% of GDP. And to keep the yield low, they will continue to do open market operations. And there is also, people have been talking, saying that you can monetize the deficit. And basically to pave the way for the government to borrow at a lower cost of interest, which means the governments do not have to follow the market discipline, and which is a bad thing to do because the government think that money is free. So this is a major concern with all the credit rating agencies. So, but at least even though this year they do this, they need to show a very credible adjustment path. Otherwise, there will be a very serious danger of downgrading by the credit rating agencies. Next. Finally, let me conclude by stating that what should the government do to manage the COVID situation? Obviously, this is not something which was planned, something which has to be done. One of the major things that it has to do is to actually front load the disinvestment program. Even in this situation, you should get rid of the Air India and MTNL, BSNL, and things like that. The principle of war finance is not to follow in principle, but that doesn't mean that you should leave a huge legacy for the future. The RBI has been active ensuring liquidity to keep the yields low, but may have to directly monetize a part of the deficit, but to ensure liquidity. But then the consequences of that in the future will have to be watched. So we need to provide the fiscal stimulus, but at the same time we need to keep a watch on our obesity. By the next year, the government should come out with a credible adjustment plan and then stick to the credible adjustment plan. You can't just go on, sort of fooling all the people all the time. Promise of consolidation should be accompanied by greater credibility. Announce the appointment of a fiscal council, an independent fiscal council, and which would report to the parliament from time to time. Will independent fiscal institution bring a fiscal discipline? Only the future can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your knowledge and insight through this expert session. To our viewers, I would like to mention that we are planning for more such expert sessions in this platform. If you have any queries, suggestions, or you want to suggest any relevant topics, please feel free to reach out to us at investordesk@brickworkratings.com. And also please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more such videos. Thank you.